I'm Ron Gallagher at Maximum Velocity Physical Therapy, and you're listening to HYPERSPEED Radio. You don't have to live in pain, whether you're running, swimming, playing a team sport, or just everyday fitness. We bridge a gap between medicine and strength and conditioning to help you break through at MVPT. What's up, everybody? This is Ron Gallagher from Maximum Velocity Physical Therapy, and you are listening to HYPERSPEED Radio. Today's topic is the shoulder. And today, what I hope to do with this podcast is dispel a few myths, give people some real practical exercises and advice, and just generally speaking, help people understand how to train, how to use this shoulder, because the amount of misinformation out there is substantial. We got DJ Chase in the house today here at Sticky Paws Studio, Las Vegas, Nevada.
Yo, yo.
Which is pretty cool. So check that out at the very end. You'll miss the...
Yeah,
do you guys call that the scratch?
Yeah, something like that. The growl.
The growl?
Uh-huh.
Sticky Paws growl. It's pretty cool. Well, and they're doing some great things here. If you happen to be interested in a podcast, they'll make it super simple for you. They can do it. If they can do it for me, they can do it for anyone. Let's be honest. But if you've been to the clinic, you know that I can be a little stubborn. I can be a little bullheaded about stuff, and it's because I've done the research for you. And the research means that I've read oodles and oodles of research and treated probably, 15,000 people with shoulder pain. And when you have that many repetitions and you have an algorithm down that you can replicate, you develop a little swag about what you can do. And if you've been in the clinic, you know that we always start with anatomy. It always comes down to anatomy. So can we show that anatomy picture, please? Perfect. We start with the bones, and we have the shoulder blade or the clavicle, and that's kind of the top of the bridge to the acromion, which is a piece of the scapula or the shoulder blade. And if you notice on that picture on the right, there's a little bit of a bridge in there, and we have some muscles that pass through there. They're super important, called the rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is, well, first finish with the bones. On the left is the humerus. That's your upper arm bone. It has a ball, and it interfaces with the flat surface on the shoulder blade called the glenoid. That connection there has a thing called the labrum, and the labrum is connective tissue. It's essentially cartilage that serves as a washer. It's triangular shaped, and it helps a round surface of the humerus interface with the flat surface of the acromion. So that's the bony anatomy. There's a thing called the capsule, which is the secondary stabilizer for the shoulder. We consider the shoulder to be the most mobile joints in the body, and that's so that you can do 360 degrees worth of motion. And if we didn't have a capsule, that would mean that the rotator cuff muscles would be working overboard all the time. So they're supposed to work together, and the rotator cuff is the primary stabilizer. But let's talk about that capsule for a minute. It's thick, dense, irregular connective tissue, and the fibers run very uniformly. And it makes it so that if you abduct your arm, the fibers on the bottom lengthen and help keep it together, and the fibers on the top shorten. And it's sort of a checks and balances system that our body uses to keep the shoulder nice and stable. The rotator cuff is a collection of 4 muscles. And since I was an undergrad, I used SITs, which is supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. It's 4 muscles that originate on the shoulder blade and attach to the top aspect of the humerus. And when they come together, they grab the head of the humerus and they pull it deep and they make it flush and flat on top of the glenoid. What that does is that compression passes the labrum, and the labrum now serves as a washer to keep that thing nice and stable. If you get a labrum problem, you essentially have a rotator cuff problem, and your rotator cuff's not able to keep the head of the humerus from pulling inside, and it kind of droops, and that droop bangs around on top of the labrum, and eventually the labrum frays or tears. So that's the shoulder. Biceps tendon actually passes right through there. That's kind of important. The biceps tendon is the 3rd stabilizer of the shoulder, and it has a long tendon, and it actually goes inside the joint and attaches on top of the labrum, which a lot of people don't know that. Even some health professionals don't know that. But the biceps tendon can get very, very irritated when you have a loose capsule and a weak rotator cuff, and now your brain's trying to use biceps to stabilize the shoulder joint, and it doesn't have the mechanical advantage to do that because it attaches inside the joint. So biceps tendonitis is a very common issue, tendinosis, I should say, and if you don't train the rotator cuff, then that thing won't feel any better. So that's the anatomy. Now we're going to talk about some physics. And this is the part where traditional treatment of the shoulder falls down. Because if you don't understand the physics of how the shoulder moves itself, then you're going to get yourself in trouble. So basically, what people try to do to strengthen the shoulder, for the most part, is use bands. And the reason why bands fall down is because if we start with the very definition of strength, that's where it starts to differ. The definition of strength, according to starting strength, is the maximum amount of load through the maximum amount of range of motion. So that means if you're using Minnie Mouse resistance and it's not heavy enough, you're actually not generating strength. And it's really hard to generate strength with elastic bands. And the reason is in the physics. So if I take my elbow and I put my elbow 90 degrees, my elbow right now is the strongest place it can be in the range of motion. If I bend my elbow as far as I can go, that's maximum flexion. It gets weaker and weaker as I go. If I try to make it as straight as I can, as straight as you can is also another weak point in the range of motion. So if I'm standing on a band and I want to train my biceps, if I start with my elbow all the way straight and the band relaxed, when I start bending my elbow, the weakest place has literally no tension down on the bottom. No tension down there whatsoever. As I start to get to mid-range, I'm starting to gather some tension in the band. By the time I get to the second weakest place in my range, the resistance is the most. So the resistance is changing as the place in the range of motion, how my muscles work, is grabbing onto the force to make that band straighten. You can develop some strength, but the result is teeny tiny. In fact, I really like this study that was done on J-bands. For whatever reason, baseball is stuck on these J-bands. It serves a purpose. You can clip it on the fence. It's super easy to travel in your bag, but so is dumbbells. Make it easy. Just carry dumbbells. But these J-bands There was a study done, and they called it a quote unquote vigorous course of J-band work. At 4 weeks, no change in strength. At 8 weeks, no change in strength. At 12 weeks, no change in strength. At 16 weeks, there was a little teeny tiny measurable amount of strength developed using these J-bands. I don't know about you, but I don't got 16 weeks to get an athlete's rotator cuff nice and strong. I need something better. And what bands can do is increase coordination. And if you love your band work, what you're actually feeling is an improvement in your coordination, not in the ability to generate more strength. There's no more fibers being used there. It's only coordination. So let's talk about how the shoulder joint is actually producing force. And so I prepared a video, and if you've been a patient, you've heard this video 100 times. If you listen to the Industrial Athlete podcast, I talked about the shoulder joint there, and this is not new, but here we go, shoulder. So here we have a teeter-totter with a fulcrum right in the middle, a ball and a box. Now, when they are there, they weigh the same. The teeter-totter balances. If the box is heavier, if the ball is heavier. Now, that's a class 1 lever. This is a class 2 lever. The length of the lever arm there is what the box has to be able to overcome in order to balance out the ball. That's exactly how our shoulder joint works. We have shoulder blade, humerus, forearm, and hand. Triangle is the fulcrum, shoulder joint. The box is the rotator cuff and scapular stability muscles. And any force moving through the hand is technically the ball. Now, the length of the arm is the same as the length of the lever arm in that top picture there. The longer that lever arm is, the harder the box has to work in order to hold up the ball. If I train the shoulder with a short lever, but then I work in my sport with a long lever, those two things will not work out. I will not get any strength. If I do get strength, it will not show up on the baseball field, on the volleyball court, in the pool. It will not show up with a band. So, you know my baseball players because they're out in the grass doing their exercises with the barbell. You know my swimmers because they're bent over the bleachers with their dumbbells, getting ready, priming their shoulder to get in the water to swim. So what I did is prepare a couple of videos of some athletes and get to see these levers in motion. So the first one, let's pull up the tennis. That's Novak Djokovic, the top tennis player in the world, maybe of all time. He's pretty darn good. This is a slow-mo video. Now, just look at the length of his arm. The length of his arm when he contacts the ball. So, boom, right there. So, as long as that lever is, his rotator cuff and momentum are generating that force. Now, I chose the tennis player first because in tennis, we extend the length of the lever arm one more segment by putting a racket in your hand. So not just generating the force to swing to hit the ball, you also got to pull the racket with you. So that's why tennis rackets these days are merely ounces, is because if the racket's too heavy, you got to generate the force to overcome that plus the force to hit the ball. Now, if you are receiving a ball and the ball is 50 miles per hour off this serve, that's 331 newtons or 75 pounds of force. Chase, can you guess for me how many sticks of butter 75 pounds of force is?
I
was looking up funny equivalents of force.
I don't know, Ron. How many butter sticks?
900 sticks of butter is the equivalent force of the ball traveling on a 50-mile-per-hour serve. Now, Djokovic is a little bit more than 2.5 times that amount. So that's how much force is coming off of his racket. That's how much strength he's got to be able to have in his shoulder, and little weenie-ass bands are probably not going to cut it. Let's look at the swimmer. So this is a video, and you can pull all these up on YouTube. These are super easy to find on YouTube. This is like one of the first things. Slow-mo, swim, stroke. So this is freestyle. Let's look at his right arm and notice that when he recovers on his right here and he enters the water, it's long lever. And what he does, as soon as his arm gets into the water, he's purchasing water and moving that water past him. The whole time that lever is long lever. In fact, the most crucial place in that swim stroke is arguably the catch. And if that catch is all rotator cuff strength in the longest lever arm possible, and you're working it with a short lever, you're not going to be able to purchase that much water. It's just physics, people. So long lever pulling water. And he's swimming at 106 per 100, which is ridiculously fast. In fact, he had water moving against him, and he had a band behind him, which we couldn't see. All right, so now let's look at the baseball, the pitcher. This is Ohtani, reigning MVP in the AL because he pitches like a beast and also hits. But he throws 90 plus miles per hour, and he's got a pretty awesome lever moving that ball from a standing position. In fact, that's generating 8,000 pounds of force. That's what's moving through the bat if I was to hit his fastball. 8,000 pounds of force that these lever arms can generate. You can't do that with elastic. I'm sorry, you just can't. It has to be heavy. Here we go. Volleyball. Volleyball spike here. Attacking the net. Look at this dude's head's above the net. It's ridiculous. But anyway, that's jumping. We'll do that another time. But his arm, long lever. Boom. That ball's traveling between 60 and 80 miles per hour and heading straight down. And even when he jumps, can you show that again? Even when he jumps, he uses these long levers to generate the momentum to jump ridiculously out of the gym. Look, way back, long lever, woo, long lever, and smash. Amazing. So now you know that it's supposed to be trained long. So how do we do that? Well, there was a study done by Major League Baseball, and they looked at rotator cuff tears in pitchers. One team chose not to participate, and everyone else did. The Philadelphia Phillies, in this study, they followed them for, I think it was a year. In one calendar year, reported 0 rotator cuff injuries in that year in pitchers. And they studied sleep patterns. They studied how they strength trained, their pitch counts, how they recover, how they prepare, everything. And the biggest, most responsible reason why they why they had no rotator cuff tears is because they train Houston exercises. HUGHSTONS, Houston's. Houston was a surgeon in the 90s who did some awful things to people. He took these really big gauge needles and he dropped them deep into people's rotator cuff. And he tested all kinds of positions and he found the best exercises to train the rotator cuff. So we had to try some rotator cuffs to get it, which is maybe why I can't find that study. I have a paper version somewhere in the doldrums of my office, but online I can't find that study. But he produced some really cool stuff. So there's a video, I think it's the last video. Yeah, this is a shortstop stud softball player. She forgot we were filming, so she didn't do her hair. She's not happy about it. But anyway, can we start that over? Sorry, I forgot I was gonna be silly there. Okay, so I sped it up a little bit because otherwise it just would take a lot of time. So here we have position 1. Position 1 is all 4 muscles of the rotator cuff. She's not going this fast during the exercise. I sped them up just so you can see what they are. Controlling the entire motion. Now, thumb up is supraspinatus only. And she's going to do, we only filmed 1 set of each. So this is position 3. And her thumb is up there. Now, those are rotator cuff exercises. These are scapular stability exercises. So these are what we call T's. And these all fall in Houston's research here. So T's, Y's. She's doing 5, 4, and 3, which is about 90% of what I consider to be the top amount of weight. 6, 5, and 4 is very, very vigorous. And if you do any more than that, what I found over the years is that it's usually deltoid. From there, we move towards moving a barbell. And here's overhead shrugs. Overhead shrugs is a priming activity to push press. And we didn't put any weight on her bar because it makes it hard to see her shoulder. But she can push press, I think 115-ish, which is a really good push press. And she has the best arm on her team, shortstop. Here's overhead rockwoods. So now we put the rotator cuff in a lengthened position and then train it same way we throw it. And we are using a band there, but we're putting it in a very minimum range, and we're only taking advantage of a very long elastic band there. So those are the prime real estate shoulder exercises. If you're injured and the very beginning weights of those hurt, it's either too much weight or you're not ready for full-on Houstons. You need to be prepped for that. That's a topic for a whole nother day. But using those exercises as a warm-up, 2 pounds is usually what I ask them for. Tennis, swimming, volleyball, baseball. I want you to keep a 2-pounder in your bag, and you're not allowed to touch a racket, the water, a ball until you prime your rotator cuff, and you do 3 sets, two or 3 sets, just enough to get it warmed up in all of those positions, and then you can play short toss, or then you can start your drills, or then you can start passing, or you can start your ground strokes or whatever in tennis. But the Philadelphia Phillies used them as a warm-up every time they touch a ball, and then 2 times a week, heavy. They usually do their Houston heavy on the day after they pitch. So I would say that's, and I've been following that for probably 10 or 15 years pretty religiously, and across the board, it's money. For throwing, a strong rotator cuff, a good push press, followed by good throwing mechanics over long toss is how shoulder strength improves. Cannot do it with a band. And if you're having trouble with long toss, or if you're having trouble with mechanics, if you get the same cue over and over and over from your coach, it's not just the mechanics, it's you don't have the rotator cuff strength to pull it off. Same thing with your swim coach. If your swim coach keeps telling you that you're crossing over or that your catch isn't strong enough, it's probably not your technique. You probably don't need to swim another 5,000 meters a day. You probably just need to establish some rotator cuff strength. And these are exercises that are very commonly missed from dry land exercises. Dry land. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to go back and look at the videos. So go back to the tennis. And now that we have how Alexis was doing the Houston exercises, look and pay attention to how her arm angle was, and let's compare that to what the tennis player looked like. Did I throw a curveball? Oh, here we go. Perfect. Okay, so remember, he's got another segment on there because he has the racket. Boom. Do you see that? That length in his arm is when his rotator cuff is generating the most torque. So if he has established normal strength in that range, and then the long levers come, he has no pain and can produce enough force to make the serve as best as he can. 75 pounds of force there. If it's 50 miles per hour. So if this is coming 120 miles per hour, that's a lot of butter. Okay, on to the swimmer. So the swimmer has an entry into the water, and right as he enters the water, he starts a pull, and that pull is rotator cuff. So on the left there, long reach, pull with the rotator cuff. Long reach on the right, rotator cuff. Yes, he does have to pull with his lats, but if you don't have the rotator cuff to position the bones in the right place, then the lats can't produce the force. So we see swimmers with these giant upward V angles, right? Because their lats are ridiculous. But the rotator cuff is the local muscle that's supporting those lats. And the scapular stability and the rotator cuff stability is how we swim pain-free. And if it can generate more force and allow the lats to produce a tremendous amount of force, you can purchase more water and move more water. And when you can do that, you'll swim faster. 106 per 100. That's ridiculous. Okay, now the baseball player. My man Ohtani, who had elbow surgery, I believe. Oh, this is a different picture. Let it go. Let's see what it does. Long. Right there. There's a very, very quick moment where all that torque shows up. And if he's actually kind of throwing from a 3 o'clock position, which was kind of cool, because if he had better rotator cuff strength, he'd be able to get more like 12 o'clock. So so he's at 3 o'clock there. So if we use a clock, 12 o'clock would be right on top. That's when the most rotator cuff torque we can produce. It makes it hard to make the ball move there, so pitchers don't like that. But they can throw fast there. It's just really hard to make the ball move there. If we get to 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, we start to be able to produce more spin on the ball. But at 3 o'clock, there's lots and lots of elbow injuries that happen there because the shoulder can't stop the force of the arm moving, and the elbow is taking on some of that friction. So it's not uncommon for me to treat elbow and wrist injuries with rotator cuff. All right, here's Ohtani. Long. So as soon as he releases that ball, his arm is in full length. And that is actually a short rotator cuff position. And the overhead rockwoods also work that in a short place. So Sometimes it's short, sometimes it's long. If you're right next to your side, the rotator cuff is long. If you use it short, then it's got to be trained short. Okay. All right. So takeaways, main takeaways from today. The rotator cuff is the primary stabilizer for the shoulder. It works hand in hand. Get that? Hand in hand with the capsule. If you have a loose capsule and a weak rotator cuff, you're more than likely having trouble overhead. A really, really stiff capsule and a weak rotator cuff can also be painful, and training rotator cuff to overcome that stiffness is just about what we do always to make that thing feel better. So rotator cuff, primary stabilizer. Secondary talking point, elastic bands can't cut it. I'm just here to tell you they can't cut it. They won't produce enough force, and your shoulder's not in the best position. In fact, I forgot to mention that if you clip the J-bands on the fence and then you do the same motion as Houston's laying down on your belly, it's actually not the same recruitment pattern because of how gravity is pulling down on the humerus. So the reason why you have to lay prone, you have to be on your belly, is so that the load is against gravity. And that gravitational force there makes it vigorous on the rotator cuff. On the fence, doing the same thing is deltoid and not rotator cuff. So it's not the same. It is absolutely, positively not the same. And the last 15 baseball guys that I've had injured, and I have 2 right now. I've got 2 guys that are going to be professionals. They now realize how silly J-bands are. And when they do their Houstons, it feels a million times different than when they do their J-bands. The position, the mode of force, the amount of force is not sufficient. That's your second talking point. Third is do your Houstons. Do them as a warm-up, light. Do them heavy 2 times a week, and your shoulder will be protected. Within 2 weeks, if you're not a pain-free person doing those exercises, you need something else. And there's ways to tweak those Houstons to match those type of pain that you're having. It's way beyond the ability of this podcast to diagnose. That's when you call me up. So do your Houstons for 2 weeks. If it doesn't work, call me up. We'll evaluate it. I'll tell you why they didn't work. Get you progressed onto them. And then when you can push press heavy, by the way, push press, I'm looking for 70% of your body weight above your head. Think about that for a second. That's a substantial amount of weight. If we go to the mall and we randomly select 100 people, how many can put 70% of weight above their head? If you don't power lift, if you don't CrossFit, if you don't pay attention to that as an athlete, the answer will be 0. There will be a very high percentage of those people who will also have some history of shoulder pathology. It's not a coincidence. But if push press is to the shoulder what squats are to the hip and knee, and you're not putting something heavy above your head, you're not managing these levers in a way that support overhead motion, overhead performance. So push press is super important as well. All right, I think that's a wrap on the shoulder. I'm Ron. This is HYPERSPEED Radio. I'm at Maximum Velocity Physical Therapy. I do this podcast at Sticky Paws Studios. They're killing it in the podcast game. Pretty soon they might be too big for me, but we'll see. Over and out. Thanks, guys.